there it is. Okay, so what I want to do, first off, I want to tell y'all thank you for joining us, all the viewers out there, the Facebook followers, and I want to thank the guests for being on. And this is going to be a different Facebook Live in that we're going to be addressing chronic wasting disease, and in my opinion, how the Texas Parks and Wildlife is using chronic wasting disease as a tool that will destroy our hunting heritage. And I'd like to know, first off, where are y'all watching from? Okay, I know that seems like every time I do a Facebook Live, I'll get somebody from Belgium or, Uruguay or someplace. I mean, it's awesome how the reach of Facebook does. And so I'm just kind of curious if you would post on there where you're watching from. And anyway, but I'd like y'all to know this is going to be a long Facebook Live. I know a lot of times on Facebook, everything's really short, but we're going to take this and my guests are some of them. I've known each of them for a long time. And in my opinion, they're some of the most knowledgeable people there are when it comes to chronic wasting disease and regulation and all that. And so every one of them's with a different organization, and we all look for that common thread that brings us together. And I'll have in the description below, there's going to be a link to each one of them's website. And so and I'll have each one of them introduce themselves to you shortly. But first off, I want to say that behind me here is this board, and on the bottom of the screen there's a place that you can object. What we're doing, we're asking for you to object to some rules that we feel are overreaching, unnecessary, and that are unfair and discriminatory toward deer breeders, and especially Texas deer breeders. And so all you've got to do is click. This is going to be a reminder. It's going to be up the whole time. I want you to click the link below. It takes you to a special page on my website. There's going to be two clicks there. You can read the rules if you've got the rest of the afternoon and an attorney sitting with you so they can interpret the rules and tell you what they are. And then if you get done with the rules before you fall asleep, then you can make your decision. Or if you object to the rules, and we're going to give you all the reasons why you ought to object. Okay, what you do is go to the objection button, copy that, go back over to the Parks and Wildlife rules, go all the way to the bottom, and paste your objection. We've already gotten your objection reply written, and just hit send, and you'll send a message to Parks and Wildlife like right now how you feel about it. And so I think after listening to all these guys, I think that you will agree that you should object to these rules, and I'll give you every reason in the world why. I don't care what side of the fence you're on right now. These guys will also tell you why. Okay, first off, and I'll introduce you to these guys in a second, but first off, I want to tell you that the Parks and Wildlife Department is a government agency. And like all government agencies, they exist to tell us what we can and can't do, and they'll never go away. Okay, and the reason why they'll never go away is because they'll never run out of money, because they'll just tax you to get more money. They'll never run out of time because they got all the time in the world. They'll never run out of people because, like any government agency, they've got an unlimited bunch of manpower. They will never go away, and they will never, ever stop trying to regulate you. And the Texas Parks and Wildlife is a government agency. And so I think that the regulation that they're proposing, I think, is unfair, unnecessary, and we're asking you to object to it. So anyway, okay, Zach, help me out, bud.
Yeah.
Okay, how the hell do I get this to work? See, it didn't work. Oh, it did. Okay. All right. So anyway, all right. So what I'm going to do, God dang it. Okay, Zach, how do I make this damn thing work?
In what way?
I want to scroll that thing down. I got to have notes because I spent a lot of time making these notes. Now I can't get to them.
So to spin this wheel right here.
This bottom wheel right here?
Yes.
Okay. You'll notice at the bottom. Okay. So, all right. So chronic wasting disease. It's about chronic wasting disease. I want to find out. I got a question to ask everybody, no matter where you're watching from. Is chronic wasting disease a concern to you? And if it is, then I'd like you to tell me this. Is chronic wasting disease a concern because you're concerned about what it's going to do to the deer or elk herd? Or are you concerned is what the wildlife agency would do if it's found in your deer or elk herd? And that's real important. I'd like to hear from y'all because I know where I lie. It's like, you know what? I don't want the government interfering with my life at all. I mean, please leave me alone. But where are you? I mean, are you worried that CWD is going to kill off all the deer? Are you worried that if they find CWD on you or on your neighbor or whatever, what's going to happen, because the agency is going to come in and do what the government thinks needs to be done. So I want to just tell you all, and so let me hear from you, please. I want to protect our hunting heritage. I think just like everybody listening and everybody watching and all my guests want to protect our hunting heritage. We want to do everything we can to create more opportunity for hunting and not less opportunity. And so deer farming is a way to create more opportunity for hunting. And so regulation on the deer farmers, when they regulate the deer farmers out of business, they create that opportunity for hunting. And whether you agree with hunting farm deer or not, it's about hunting, in my opinion. We want to make sure and support the future of hunting. So anyway, like I said, I just feel that anything that restricts the opportunity is bad. So let's get to CWD. Okay, CWD's been around a long time. It's been over 50 years ago since it was discovered in Colorado and then in Wyoming, and we all hear the sky is falling, and they've got concerns about CWD. It seems like everybody's jumping on the CWD bandwagon. I mean, you've got organizations that are on the bandwagon. You've got agencies on the bandwagon. Everybody, that's the right thing to do, right? Okay, it's now in 26 states. It's in 5 Canadian provinces, and we're told that it could wipe out an entire herd of deer and elk. Well, lightning may strike this building that I'm in right now, but odds are that's not going to happen, okay? Just like CWD hasn't wiped out any deer or elk herd. Now, think about this. If CWD was so bad, and I hope there's wildlife people watching. I hope there's wildlife commissioners watching right now. It'd be really nice, because I think that you would have an opportunity to hear our side of this and hear these experts' side of this and why these rules, we want you to oppose them. Why it's so important to oppose these rules, okay? But if CWD was so bad, why hadn't it wiped out any herds, okay? It hasn't, okay? And so you got to look at it, because if CWD is found in the wild, what do? It all depends on what state you're in. But if it's found in the captive herd in Texas, you know what's going to happen? Texas Parks and Wildlife is going to come to the rescue and kill all the deer. Okay? And the reason why is because they're going to contain the disease. They want to contain the disease. Okay? So they kill all the deer. That seems logical to the people that don't know anything about the disease. Just kill all the deer. That'll fix it. Okay? So today we're going to tell you why that's not going to work. Okay? And so we need you to oppose these rules and stop the killing of these captive deer and stop the discrimination that is against deer farmers. So now you may be, if you're a hunter and you're concerned about hunting farm deer, okay, and I understand that there are hunters out there that don't like hunting farm deer, okay, then I want to say we need your help, okay. Now think about this: we need to support all hunting, okay. And the reason why I'm saying that, if you're a hunter and you're opposed to farm deer, it'd be like me being a quail hunter, okay, and me being opposed to people that are raising quail to be released on places, and so I'm against quail farmers. Okay, we need more hunters, okay? And deer farming, whether you do it or not, guess what? Whether you hunt for farm deer or not, that's not the point. Hunting is the point. We want to save our hunting heritage, okay? And same thing goes for fishing, if you think about it, okay? Do you fish in a small pond? Is that fair chase fishing? Do you wind up fishing for in an area where they put trout in a stream or whatever, coming from a hatchery? They got to come from somewhere. Is that fair chase fishing? Okay, it may not be for you, but that doesn't mean it's not good for a kid or somebody wants to go fish for those fish. So what we want to do is we want to support all hunting. Okay, so let's get to our guests. I'm going to have them introduce themselves and tell you about their organization and all. But first up, Tim Condict. I'm going to tell you, I've known Tim for 30 years. Tim's as knowledgeable as anybody I've known out there with chronic wasting disease. And I want, Tim, you take it over and tell them what you do.
Keith, I work with Big Time Deer Solutions, and I consult with folks in the deer breeding community to mitigate the risk of contracting CWD.
Okay, all right. But what about as far as this containment goes? I mean, when they come in and they're going to wipe out deer. Talk about this containment issue, please.
Well, obviously, as we look around and see the map across the United States and in other countries and everything else, it's obvious that we can't contain the disease. I've been working on CWD since 1997, Keith, and it's impossible to contain, control, or stop from spreading across the country, regardless if any state has a deer farm or not. In fact, the most infected state in the nation is Wyoming, and they've never had deer farms or allowed high fence hunting. CWD, like you said, was discovered in mule deer at the Colorado Division of Wildlife Research Facility in Fort Collins, Colorado, where Research on scrapie infected sheep had been ongoing for decades. Scrapie apparently jumped the species barrier and created CWD. Unfortunately, the Colorado Division of Wildlife spread the disease to numerous locations inside and outside their state and inside and outside high fence.
But hold on a second,
Wildlife
Tim. Hold on. I want to go back to containment because I'm looking at right here. Okay, Parks and Wildlife sent me an email the other day that they're going to contain CWD. Okay, and I'm sitting here going, now, wait a minute, this is like fake news. Is it? Okay, I'm going to read this to you. Okay, MLD. An MLD in Texas is a land that is managed for deer through a permit with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department that we allow hunters to come on our land. Okay, and there's thousands of us that take tens of thousands of hunters every year on our land. Okay, when Parks and Wildlife gave a survey the other day, and the very first line says, chronic wasting disease surveillance of hunter-harvester deer is critical for early detection and containment of the disease. So they're saying they can contain it. Talk about that.
I will. I did want to just touch on that point, though, that they mislead the public into believing by calling it a captive facility that they found CWD in to start with, that it started in deer farms, and that is actually not true at all. And so, but research proves that scavengers, including crows and coyotes, pass CWD infectivity through their feces after consuming the infected parts of a carcass. Every scavenger fed homogeneous from scrapie positive brain material had positive feces in every research animal, and they fed tiny amounts, and every one of those amounts of a homogeneous that they fed to research animals, every one of those animals became infected.
Okay, so
the research proved that every scavenger spreads it. CWD.
So it can't be stopped, right? It can't be stopped. No. I mean, it can't be contained. Okay, so Tim, hold on, I got to introduce other folks here. Okay, so next off, okay, we talk about deer farming. Okay, we have rules. We have rules we have to live under as American citizens. We have rules. And speaking of rules, I mean, John, introduce everybody and tell why they need to object to these rules.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me, John True. I'm the president of the Texas Deer Association. I got to start off and say, thanks for having me today. But the guys that we have today engaged today have been together since the spring, and that's Kevin Davis, Tim Condict, Charly, Seale, Shawn, Schafer, and Keith. You as well. We all kind of have our own different perspective, and each have been great to work with. This is something we work every day, all day on. Any line of business needs rules and regulations, but we need clear and fair rules. The breeding community is the only entity in the state and across the nation that has any kind of mandated testing for CWD. And we certainly don't, we're not against that, but we also we're handed, we're not against looking for CWD. We wish there was more equitable testing across more stakeholders. We were just handed in March of this year 3 pages of additional new rules that were thrown against the breeders. And the most important one of those, we talked about mitigating the risk of CWD. It's all about early detection and stopping movement, and we've got a system in place right now that does that very thing. The rules that the additional rules that we got in March of this year, the biggest part of that was a 14-day time limit to submit a sample once an animal dies. That is actually being reduced to 7 days, which we're really not against. But we feel like all of the testing that we're doing is sufficient in early detection and stopping movement, and history shows that. I mean, we talk about, everybody always says follow the science. Well, following the science is exactly what we want to happen right now, because it shows that when that system is in place and we're detecting the disease early enough, we're able to contain this disease as it is, and it's not any other. There's no other big time risk associated with it.
Okay, so John, let me go back to Tim for a second. Tim, you said you did have some good news that you were going to share with everybody at the end of this, right?
Yes, sir. I do have some good news.
Okay, so tell everybody kind of what that is, and we'll tell them more about that later.
All right. Well, we've got great news coming from all over. In Wyoming, the University of Wyoming just published some research about the mule deer out there transitioning to a codon allele that's resistant to CWD, as well as the elk in the Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. And we have great news from Dr. Chris Seabury's research on genomic estimated breeding values. And we're going to give Mother Nature a boot in the butt, and we're going to help solve CWD.
Okay, deer farmers and elk farmers are going to help solve it. But okay, we talked getting back to rules. Okay, the rules, and we want you to object to these rules. Now, if you got time to read the rules, there's a link right there. Go read the rules. And like I said, you better have a pot of coffee, and it's going to take you hours to read the rules and to be able to understand them. But speaking of rules, there was a guy that used to enforce the rules for the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. He's a game warden. He's a friend of mine. Okay, he's a friend of the deer farming industry. His name is Kevin Davis. Kevin, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell them about rules and why you're opposed to these rules.
Absolutely, Keith. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate this opportunity. Like John said, I've enjoyed working with everyone this summer that's on your panel today. My background is law enforcement. I currently serve as the Chief Executive Officer of the Deer Breeders Corporation. But going back to my background in law enforcement, you may remember, Keith, that back in 2014, when I went to headquarters at Parks and Wildlife and became a member of the executive leadership team, went to work working on relationships with deer breeders. We wanted to improve our relationship from a community policing standpoint, where a community-oriented policing standpoint, where we create a relationship and trust and develop trust with our breeders across the state, in the hopes that they would want to voluntarily comply with the rules, and then also help police each other to abide by the rules and put everybody on the same playing ground. And that philosophy is one that I've lived by my entire law enforcement career. And unfortunately, with these rules that are proposed right now, there is a component, this live animal testing component prior to release, that has way less to do with CWD than it suggests in the rulemaking, meaning that it is a perceived enforcement issue over at Parks and Wildlife that they wanted to correct and actually prevent somebody from breaking the law that already exists. And unfortunately, that is counter to the COPS philosophy, or the community-oriented policing philosophy that we've lived by and been successful on as game wardens throughout the years. And it harms a relationship, and it basically sets a stage for deer breeders to be guilty of being deer breeders.
Okay, so
not a
Kevin,
break of the law.
I don't mean to stop, but hold on. Live testing, everybody. When you read these rules, if you go to link to object, okay, and you read the rules, you're going to see the live testing is on there. And at first you would think, what's wrong with live testing? Okay, what's wrong with live testing? Well, Kevin's already addressed a lot of things that are wrong with live testing. But let me tell you how live testing goes about. When these rules came into play, okay, live testing was accepted for 6 months. You had to live test every animal that you were going to release. Okay, so we live tested them, and the way most people did it, they take a rectal sample, it's a biopsy out of the rectum, and you send it in, and the deer farmer pays for that. Okay, there were 12,000 deer that were released. They were tested and released. 12,000 coming from deer farms. That's 12,000 hunting opportunities for people out there. 12,000. I wonder how many hunting opportunities Texas Parks and Wildlife introduced this summer. But the deer farming community introduced 12,000 hunting opportunities, and every one of them was live tested for CWD. Kevin, tell them how many positives there were.
0. There were 0 positives under the emergency rule, and it came at a tremendous cost. I think we proved some things in abiding by those this summer, meaning that we proved that our herd surveillance program with mortalities in the pen is working as it's designed to function. And we spent well over $3.5 million doing that. And unfortunately, that's 10 times the budget amount for Parks and Wildlife to do their CWD surveillance across the state. And so breeders bore that at 10 times the amount.
Okay, so we've been talking about whitetail deer here, folks, and you may think CWD is just a whitetail deer issue. It's not. Okay, it crosses other species as well. And so what we've done, we've asked somebody that that is a specialist outside the whitetail industry. And I want Charlie to introduce himself to you and why they're opposed to these rules and why they think that you need to click below and oppose these rules. Charlie, hit it.
Hey, Keith, thank you very much for having us here and also putting this foil bone. And it's important to know I'm kind of known as the exotic guy. on all this. And I'm coming to you today from ground zero. I'm right here in Colorado, and where all this mess started, as you alluded to earlier. But the thing that's coming outside of these onerous rules, and it's been a pleasure working with these guys that are leaders of their associations. And, you know, we, in our working group with Parks and Wildlife, we threw out what I believe to be a tremendous amount of regulations that we thought we could live with, that were, even though onerous, they were still protective of the wild herd, as well as the farm serving community. And what's happening now is we're going beyond the white-tailed deer. This thing now has bled over into the exotic industry. There are 3 known susceptible species, which are elk, red deer, and sika. And right now, people are wanting so badly to find it at axis deer and other species. And I can't even tell you what that's going to do if that ever happens. They're opening up Pandora's box with that. But we have so many crossover members, Keith, with the whitetail industry that we feel like it's, you know, these rules, they were never intended. The Code of Federal Regulations, which set up the regulations for interstate commerce on white-tailed deer and elk, were never established to eliminate or eradicate the disease. It was, Tim alluded to it earlier, and that was to mitigate the risk of spreading CWD through these rules. And these rules have worked. They work, we find it, but what happens is the animals, we're learning nothing from these animals that we find that are infected. We come in here, we kill them out, and we've learned absolutely nothing. And thank God we've got people like Dr. Seaberry and Dr. Nick Haley and people like that are looking for the genetic resistance in these animals. And I think that's the good news on the end of this industry. Now, again, I'm the executive director of the Exotic Wildlife Association, and we stand arm in arm with the deer community.
Okay, so we'll have folks. We'll have a link to each one of these guys in the description below. And so Charlie mentioned he's at Ground Zero. He's in Colorado right now. Okay, but so this is a nationwide issue. I mean, there's 26 states, 5 Canadian provinces got CWD, and so because it's a nationwide issue, I asked Shawn Schafer to join us. Shawn, tell everybody who you are and what y'all do.
Thank you, Keith. Shawn Schafer, Executive Director for the North American Deer Farmers Association. Myself, I've been working in this CWD arena, I guess, for 24 years now. Charlie and I think, have sat on just about every CWD committee there's been, and been very instrumental in writing the federal rules. You mentioned the Code of Federal Regulation. And, you know, as John alluded to, I mean, we are not some rogue industry that's not wanting to be rules, regulated. As you said, I don't want the government in my business any more than I have to, but I think we recognize that there are rules and regulations needed, to safely move these animals around. And, there is a federal program, that lays out science-based that dictates, what really needs to be done. And I believe that these proposed rules are going far above and beyond that, and the amount of live testing required and when it's being required is way more than needs to be, especially now when you bring in the newest science with this, as Tim said, the genetic resistance, these breeding values. There's a lot of stuff that could be incorporated in meshing them in. Are we opposed to live testing? Absolutely not. I mean, there's times when they're needed, when a positive herd is detected. Let's go on there and live test, see what they got. Let's, that if they're not detected, let's get those animals turned out and use them for that hunting opportunity you talked about. So there's some tremendous science has been gained in the last few years. There's some, hard proven rules and regulations over the last 2 decades that have been in place that show that this disease can be managed and can be worked with. And, it has not been decimated a population anywhere in the country. Texas itself has had this disease for more than a decade already. And all of a sudden we're acting like, boom, it's a boogeyman that we just found.
Well, Shawn, how come is it that every state has different ways that they handle it then? I mean, it's like, Texas has a different response. I asked earlier, I mean, is the viewer more concerned about finding CWD on your piece of property, what it's going to do to your herd, or are they more concerned with the response from the wildlife people? I mean, why is it everybody handles it different?
And that's probably the biggest thing is, there is no this code of regulation that Charlie talked about is on the animal health side, you know, and on the breeding side. The wildlife agencies, as you say, it seemed like it's kind of a free for all out there. They're not all handling it the same. They're not all doing, you know, the exact same thing, you know, and I'll tell you what happens every time we find it in a new location, a new spot. Boom, this mass hysteria hits. It's like we discovered a brand new disease that just never ever seen before. And that's not truly the case. And I don't know if they're just riding the hype to chase the dollars and you know,
Because there is a lot of money.
Guns
there's a lot of money there. I mean,
Yes,
there's
there
some
is.
people
Yes, there
follow
is.
the money. But
I think they really need to take a step back, look at the big picture and say, you know, this disease, as Tim mentioned, 1967. It's been here, it's been around, you know, maybe it's always been here. Maybe it's a naturally occurring disease. We really don't know. I think it's, they take that run and gun attitude with it, you know, and I think we truly need to step back and look and see where really is it, where is it not, and like I said, go slow, you know, and methodically, and like I said, not drive people away, because that's the worst part about this. The more hysteria they throw at it, the more they drive away that soccer mom or that person
yes,
that's maybe
yes,
just starting to get into hunting. That guy that's 30, 40 years old, never been hunting, but is thinking about it. His office worker, coworker maybe hunts. He's thinking about going hunting too. And all of a sudden, wham, he gets hit with a zombie deer disease. Where the heck did that come from? You
right.
know, and,
Well, it's hysteria,
all of
and
a
that's
sudden,
what
are we
they.
hurting hunting and hunting heritage more than we're helping it.
That's exactly right. And so we wind up talking about the money. Everybody's got there's money involved here, folks. And what we're talking about is science and the truth. Okay. And so think about this. In Texas, the Parks and Wildlife Department comes in, like I said, comes to the rescue. They're going to annihilate a whole herd. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you want to use those animals for study animals? I mean, that there are some animals that, guess what? They may live. And we found that some of them are a whole lot less susceptible to CWD than others. Now, Tim, you mentioned earlier that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, and talk about the what the light is briefly. Let's hit that. Then we want to start answering questions because we're getting hit with a lot of questions.
Well, what the light is breeding values that estimate an animal's ability to resist susceptibility to CWD when they're exposed. And so Dr. Chris Seabury has been working on this for years and years, and he's got it perfected. It's available to us now. We're working on it now. We've got 10,000 animals have already been tested, and we found that we have some highly resistant animals, and we're finding that we have a high amount of them to the tune of somewhere around 38% right now. And so we're going to be able to breed up herds and herds of animals that will be able to resist CWD. And so we will work hand in hand with wildlife agencies. We want to work hand in hand with Honors. We want to work with everyone to try to help mitigate the risk of CWD. But more than that, we want to help Mother Nature. And we want to help Mother Nature do away with CWD by assisting Mother Nature with speeding up the process, because Mother Nature is fixing it all over the country right now. It's already been proven. But we have a way to accelerate that. And Charlie alluded also to Nicholas Haley, who's done a lot of research as well. And he's figured out some codons and everything that are valuable as well. And we're lapping those two research projects on top of each other to build up highly resistant animals that we will be able to utilize, and wildlife agencies should utilize them as well. Let's hope so, because it would be the smart thing to do. But I did want to touch on, when we were talking about earlier, you talked about, is there a way to contain it? Well, you have to realize that dust has CWD in it. And so Minnesota is even talking about banning hay coming from positive states. Is that really where we want to go? Because it's being spread across the nation with every particle of dust that's in all the agriculture products. It's in the compost, it's in the topsoils that people are buying at Walmart all across this country. I don't think that if people step back and take a breath and think about it, they will realize that there is no possible way to contain, stop, or slow the spread of CWD. Because in Texas alone last year, Keith, they moved 850,000 carcasses. And we all know that those predators and scavengers that feed on the carcasses and the parts that get thrown out in the back 40 are all positive parts in them. And those crows and scavengers and buzzards and the coyotes and everything else that feed on them move that positive material all over the state of Texas. And we're not doing anything about that. The problem that we have, one of the problems we have, is we don't want everyone to be overregulated. But one of the problems that we have is, why are we the only ones being regulated?
Okay, so
no
Tim,
one else is.
hold on. Somebody sent a question here. They want me to ask you. A guy, Levi, he says, how far does CWD spread in a year in a non-high fence environment?
That's a pretty funny one. If they take a carcass from Wyoming to Florida, about 2,000 miles. But I would want to touch on this real quick, Keith. You know, there's some people, especially in wildlife agencies, they pick and choose the research to try to fit an agenda instead of actually going to get the research, even when they know better. For instance, like the research that was just completed in Wisconsin that said CWD moves 0.7 miles a year in low fence. So if that's the case, then Wyoming's had it 350 years, and Missouri and Arkansas's had 150 years. Apparently, it moves a little further than 0.7 miles a year in a low fence situation.
But don't deer travel far? The deer travel further than 0.7 miles a year.
Yeah, there's a recent research out of Missouri where they had some collared deer, and a buck in 22 days during the rut traveled 186 miles as the crow flies. And if he would have been a positive CWD, he would have spread CWD for a 186-mile trail.
Wow, that's incredible.
On
Okay.
another note, on that same note, in Wisconsin, just in the 4 most infected counties, and they got, I think, 20 some counties that are infected, but in the 4 most infected, they did a zip code study of every hunter that was there, and it was 32,000 hunters from all over the nation that came there and hunted and took them out. And when they extrapolated the prevalence rate of the disease, there were at least 5,000 positive deer that were harvested and not tested. 2,000 were tested, but at least 5,000 total that were not tested that went somewhere. We hope that there were rules and regulations that they're only supposed to take the boned out meat, but did they? We don't know. We hope it's an honor system that's not enforced. We don't know how, there's no checks or balances to it, but regardless, that's 5,000. We always hear about this one deer here, one deer there, but at least 5,000 deer were taken from them 4 counties, and only those 4 counties went somewhere. Where did they go? Where did those remains go? We don't ever talk about that. And that's just from one.
That were positive.
The 26 states that have CWD.
And so the future, in my opinion, what it looks like if we can't get an agreement with the wildlife departments and say, let's use science to be able to get us out of this. It seems like to me, the future, you're going to see instead of 26, it's going to be 27 and 28, and 29, and it's going to be all over the place, because when you look for something, you're going to find it. Okay. And I know that deer farmers we are so overregulated. I mean, we are looked at and looked at and looked at. Like I said, 12,000 animals were tested, live tested, those 12,000 hunting opportunities, and not one positive. Okay. And I'm thinking, how many wild animals get tested? But okay, here's a question for you. Here's a question. Tim, answer this one. If somebody kills a deer that's got CWD, first off, they're not going to know it unless it's get tested. Okay, let's face that. Should they be afraid to eat it?
Well, if that were the case, I think that Fort Collins, Colorado, all the people in Fort Collins, Colorado would have probably died of a disease if they contracted it from a CWD positive, because the stream that runs in to feed their water system actually runs right through those research facility pens at Colorado Division of Wildlife Research Facility, and dumps billions and billions of positive material into that environment every year. And they find that it's in the water.
So it's important to point out that no person has ever gotten CWD. Not one ever. Okay. And the thing is,
early 5,000 positive, known positives. If it's a known clinically sick, you can see it's a sick animal.
Then don't eat it.
Animals. But if it looks fat and sassy and healthy, I would eat it.
Right. Same here. And I wound up just for those
time
watching. I did 2 documentaries on CWD about 6-7 years ago, and they're on our YouTube channel. And I interviewed a lot of scientists, CWD scientists, that ate positive animals. I mean, it's just nobody wants to knowingly eat an animal that's got a disease, and they wouldn't. Okay. But you know what? I don't think the fear ought to be there so much that we scare people away from hunting. I'm all about, and we're all about saving our hunting heritage. That's what it's about. Okay. I mean, Kevin, when he was a game boy, I mean, they worry about hunters. We got to have hunters. What were you going to say, Tim?
Hey, Keith, I was just going to say that if they're all that concerned about getting CWD from an animal that they harvest, maybe it would be smart if they hunted behind a fence in Texas where all of those animals have been tested.
That's a pretty good idea right there. Seriously, if people are concerned about CWD, I never thought of that. That's a good idea. So, okay, I'm trying to look at this. I'm looking at questions coming in. Holy smoke. So there's a lot of comments on here, guys. Anybody else? Let me read one. Okay. They're using CWD as an avenue to accomplish other items on their agenda. I have to kind of agree with that. I wouldn't disagree with that at all. And here's one. What qualifies the people from Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission? Come on, man. On deer breed, to make decisions on deer breeding and programs when none of them are in the position of a deer breeder or have any knowledge of it. Somebody Kevin, you got a smile on your face. What do you say there?
You know, obviously the Parks and Wildlife Department has regulatory authority over white-tailed deer. However, there is a lot more at play right now in this discussion, and it's political, and it's disheartening. This is this entire discussion as it relates to the overburdensome portions of the rule is related to competition in Texas, meaning people that are already selling hunts and having hunters on their property don't want to compete with deer breeders for the same hunters or for anything for that matter. And so there's a lot of pressure being placed on that agency to regulate us right out of business so they can move on with their business model that's different than ours.
Well, there's somebody on here that commented that more deer have been killed looking for CWD than CWD has ever killed. What do you think about that, John?
I couldn't agree more. I think, you know, an animal disease issue should never become political, and that's where we are right now. I think there are, you know, a lot of things have been said. I think there are always unintended consequences from all of this, making this disease to be something that it's really not. And when you talk about preserving hunting heritage, you know, what are we really hoping to achieve on all this? At this, the deer breeders are the only entity that has any kind of mandated testing. What are we saying to people? I mean, the only safe and tested animals are behind a high fence that have been brought in by a deer breeder. I sure hope that's not where we're going.
Okay, here's a question.
I think there has to be.
Go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
There has to be a mutual level of confidence, right? I mean, when we sell deer to a ranch, they know that we have the annual surveillance. We've tested for 10, 15 years every mortality that dies, and we have, you know, confidence that there's not a prevalence, any CWD prevalence on that specific farm. We don't have that same coming the other way. When there's 850,000 animals harvested a year, we don't have the same confidence that animal that you shot in Llano County and you're taking it back to Houston or Dallas or whatever isn't coming from a CWD area. And so I think that's kind of what it comes down to for us. It's just kind of having some fair regulations.
Okay, Charlie, here's one for you. How come the people that have free-ranging elk in West Texas are now being required to test their animals, the hunter-harvested animals?
You know, Keith, and that's an excellent question that we've been pushing for years. The Trans-Pecos herd out there should have the same regulations, but they don't. They're free-range animals, and those ranchers that whosever place they happen to be on that particular day should have an obligation to test any hunter harvest Trans-Pecos elk, and that right there has been a thorn in a lot of our sites. All the guys that have the high fence elk, we have to test the first 3 that die on our place or that are hunter harvested. But the free range animals are left to their own volition.
So what's going to happen, you think, if somebody out in West Texas sends in a sample on a elk that turns out to be positive? What do you think's going to happen?
Well, I can promise you right now, there's probably already elk out there that are positive because they come in and out of New Mexico and across those Guadalupe Mountains. And the West Texas mule deer, that was the very first cases we found were free range mule deer that were along in those Waco Mountains that were along the New Mexico border. And we've known for years that New Mexico was absolutely endemic with CWD. And what made us think that it was a matter of not testing. And when we started testing, like you said a while ago, you test, you're going to find it.
Okay. All right. I got one for you, Shawn. Why hasn't a vaccine been developed for CWD when there is an instant vaccine for COVID?
Good question. Number one, there has been some vaccine trials. Some vaccine trials coming out of Alberta, Canada. You know, the very first ones didn't work very well, but there is one in the works right now that is looking similar. When it comes, I'll tell you, it's the industry that's developing it and working on it, and we'll be the first ones to vaccinate our animals. Is it there yet? No, it could be decade away yet, but I can promise you, though, it's being tried and proven, and you'll have to go through all types of trials that maybe some of the COVID vaccine might have skipped. So.
Okay. I want to point out to people again, the science, we have to follow science. You hear that on the news where they're talking about COVID, and then it's like, I don't know which one of y'all talked about. It's a shame, John, when the disease becomes political. It's clearly COVID's become political. It's at this side against this side, and we live in a world where everybody's trying to divide everybody up. You go there, you go there, you go there. I think we are all looking for that common thread that brings us all together. Okay, and we want to work together with the wildlife departments. We want to say, look, we're not the bad guys. We're working with you. We have laboratories right there on our deer farms. Come out, let's work together and have reasonable regulation to where we can all accomplish the same thing. Nobody wants to see sick animals. Nobody wants to have chronic wasting disease. But you know what? The truth of the matter is, it does exist. We can't contain it. We know that's the truth. And so all the regulation in the world is not going to fix that. Okay? And the only thing I jokingly said, if you want to get rid of CWD, just kill all the deer. Just kill them all. Then you won't have to worry about it. You won't have to worry about hunting either. But okay, here's one for you. Kevin. It says it's amazing millions of deer reported as being killed legally in the U.S. each year. Doesn't include the number of illegally killed deer or deer killed by vehicles. So where is the deer population being devastated by CWD? I mean, I don't really get that. I mean, I don't think we have a number of how many deer are being killed by CWD. I mean,
Keith, I think I might have an answer for that one. I think what they're trying to say is it decimating a population? Is it, wiping out deer across the country? And the hard answer to that, or the easy answer to that, is no, because the average age in population, or average age of a deer throughout this country is 1.5 years. CWD is a slow moving disease. It isn't like, shouldn't get confused with EHD or blue tongue. I think that's where some of the confusion comes in. Deer that, disease that does kill them within days. CWD, chronic wasting disease, takes years. The incubation period, 18 to 24 months, clinical 30 some months, and they die. So, but a Chevy, a Ford, a 30-06 or a Coyote wipes them out far before that.
Okay, so
it's not going to wipe out the population across this country. You can't in a national park or somewhere where it doesn't have hunting, doesn't have natural predators. There might have an artificial, higher age population than what we have, or in the wild, but yeah, the Mother Nature takes care of them one way or another before CWD ever truly kicks in and wipes them.
But let's address this. I mean, all this hysteria about CWD, you would think that deer dying everywhere from CWD. Okay, I mean, you got to think there's got to be a lot of deer that are dying of CWD with as much as you're hearing about it. As much fear is being put out there. I want to address, Shawn, how many deer really are dying of CWD?
They say very few, and there's no doubt that it's a serious disease. There's no doubt it's a real disease. There's no doubt that deer do die of CWD. But normally, like I say, it's the one they find wandering around these urban deer, and Deer somewhere that live to be, because they have to live, like you say, from the time of exposure, they need to live at least 2 more years. And we do get deer out there like that, but very few. The average age, like I said, is 1.5 years. Even a 2.5-year-old deer is going to get harvested before it ever gets to that clinical point or ever gets to where it's going to impact the population. A white-tailed doe will breed as a yearling, as a fawn, and will have fawns by then. So the average white-tailed doe will probably have 6 to 9 fawns, with the twins and triplets before she ever does get clinical, if she ever makes it to that point in life. The recruitment rate for white-tailed deer, and I hate to say it, but they're right up there with almost cockroaches. I mean, them things can multiply and breed. That's how we see the bounce backs from, these EHD, from epizootic hemorrhagic disease or blue tongue. It don't wipe out a population because these things can breed and come back. So is it serious? Yes, it's serious. That's why we have a program. That's why we have federal rules. But is it so serious that we need to kill an industry, or we need to overregulate an industry, or we need to drive hysteria with zombie deer disease and drive people away from hunting? No, we need to put this in perspective. We need to manage it, and we need to move forward,
Well,
and tools
and
now that we
with responsible regulations. And so that's the reason why we're asking people to oppose these rules. I mean, it's like, it's real simple, folks. If you sit here and you watch and you agree with us and you don't oppose them, guess what? You don't have a leg to stand on. I mean, it's like, come on, we need your help. We need you to get involved and send a message to Texas Parks and Wildlife that, you know what, you oppose these. Okay, we want to work with Texas Parks and Wildlife. There are groups out there that would like to see us go away. Okay. And the thing is, I think, why? Aren't we all in this together? Aren't they concerned about the future of hunting? I look at it, I don't care if you like bucks or ducks or elk or turkey or pheasant. It doesn't matter to me. If you're a hunter, I'm for you. Now, I may not hunt the way you hunt or how you hunt, but I'm not going to restrict you from hunting. And I look at it and think, deer farming has a place in the hunting world. There's we got a comment on here that John, it says, deer farming facilities are the only thing that's going to save us. Where will the Department of Wildlife turn to once the number take a turn for the worst? They're going to go to the deer farms that are in good health. What do you think?
I agree. I think at the start of the summer, we had I think the number was 980 deer farms in Texas. And as of the end of September, we were told that number is 868 now. So this emergency rule has killed already over 100 deer farms. And as we've talked about, Chris Seale's research being done, we're the only entity trying to find out a way to breed around this disease to see if we can solve it. And ultimately, we're going to have the only safe deer at the end of the day.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there's a group out there, the National Deer Association, and the Boone and Crockett Club. I mean, recently this week I've seen some announcement about CWD, and they're claiming, they're helping with CWD, which is great. Okay, but I'm thinking, but they never mentioned the captive deer industry helping. I mean, have you ever seen them mention the captive deer industry, Shawn? I mean, I'm thinking, who is leading the way? We have all these animals that, if we have a positive in a herd, rather than coming in and killing them all, why wouldn't they put them in quarantine and monitor them and see what happens? I mean, so what do you say about that, Shawn?
That's a great point you bring up. Like you said, we want to work together with Parks and Wildlife. We also want to work together with these different sportsmen's groups. You mentioned Boone and Crockett. Myself, the North American Deer Farm is working very closely with a lot of these conservation groups. And in Washington, D.C., actually, you mentioned the vaccine earlier. It takes research. It takes funding to get the research. There's a lot of great research proposals out there. There's no dollars. So right now in Washington, D.C., we have a bill that was introduced just this week for $70 million to go to research and go to management of this disease. So, but it's going to take all of us working together, just like here, trying to get fair and equitable, parity in these rules, it's going to take all of us pulling together to get that legislation passed and through. So we have the funding to use for research so we can develop vaccines and other tools and methods to manage this disease. You're not going to eradicate it. It's going to be here. It's in the soils. Right. We can manage it.
Right. Okay. So, all right, here's one for you, Kevin. And this guy, I mean, he's on there, Joe, and I guess he thinks we're trying to avoid his question, but I want you to be able to address this. Y'all keep avoiding how many deer in Texas have proven died from CWD. Let me repeat that. Y'all keep avoiding how many deer in Texas have proven died from CWD. Hit it.
0.
Yeah,
There's
Joe,
been no-
0. I mean, it's
There's
like,
the deer that have died of CWD in Texas are the deer that have been destroyed to be tested to see if they have it. That's it.
and so, and I think, Joe, what the deal is, I mean, you're listening to the hysteria. Yeah, I mean, you're drinking their Kool-Aid. And what I'm saying is, like, it's just like when I held up my computer and I showed, I got an email, so did the thousands of MLD participants in Texas that, the Texas Parks and Wildlife, this early detection is going to help them contain the disease. You can't contain the disease, okay? So it's like a matter of let's just don't get the truth is what I'm trying to tell you. We're all trying to tell you. Okay, here's one. Why does Texas Parks and Wildlife Department have confidence in the science of live testing to move deer from pen to pasture, but they refuse to utilize this science as an option in trace-out cases when a CWD positive is found in a breeding facility? Tim, hit that one.
Oh, I like that one. I should have sent that in. I should have typed that in myself. Actually, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any sense that they don't do that. I mean, what the question they're asking obviously answers itself. I mean, if you find the disease in a pen and you are willing to utilize the live test to be able to put them out in the pasture and everything else to prove their innocence or whatever, but then we go to a deer that's been away from been exposed to that herd, been away from it for 4.5 years, and they come in and kill it. Obviously, if the deer would have been exposed with a dosage that would have given it the disease, would have already been dead on its own. And so they don't have to come kill them, come and live test it, and let the farmer continue to do business. And you have to realize that while they are doing all this, you're shut down from doing business. And it takes sometimes months before you can get this done.
Okay, and somebody may be thinking out there, if you're not a deer farmer, I want to tell you, deer farming is not all about the money. Okay, yeah, you can make money at it, but you know what? If you've got a small, low-fence piece of property and you lease it out, lease for people to come hunt on your land, you're making money off of that too. So it's not about the money. Okay, for the most part, deer farming is a lifestyle. It's about the family. It's about doing something on a small piece of property in rural Texas or rural America that wouldn't be good for anything else, but you can raise whitetail deer on it, and it's a great place to raise kids. It's a great place to have your family. It's a great way of life. It's a lifestyle. And so, yep, you can make money on it, but it's a lifestyle. And so that's the reason why I encourage you, if you've never been to a deer farm, heck, contact any of these guys at deer elk farm, and Charlie line you up with all the elk farmers you want to go to too. But okay, here's one. Let me see here. Okay, I'm going to ask John you to answer this one. This guy, Cyrus, is asking, he says, I know it's a lot, but can you give a very brief summary of what the proposed rules would do?
Sure. Well, I'd say the majority of the rules were posed by us because we kept hearing it's all about, as we talked about, early detection and containment of this disease. And as prior to these rules, these proposed rules, it's all our annual surveillance. We've had mandated testing every year. And prior to these rules through Parks and Wildlife, you've been forced to test 80% of your death loss of any animal 16 months and older. So any animal that dies in your pens, if it's 16 months or older, you have to test 80% of that number. That will change to 100%, and that age be reduced to 12 months old. So any animal 12 months and older, any animal, 100% of your animals that die in your pens will be tested.
Tell them how to test, though, John.
100% animal that dies.
John, tell them what a test is. I mean,
Yeah.
How do we test it?
A test is you basically take the brain stem and a lymph node from each animal that dies, and everybody that as a deer farmer has to go get certified by Texas Animal Health Commission to do that, for ourselves also, or take it to a vet if you're not certified to do that. But that's every different animal that dies. That's also at our expense. Every animal that dies and is tested. Parks and Wildlife in 2016 instituted the rules that I just talked about, the 80% of 16 months and older. They also put in a minimum death mortality, which is a 3.6%. We have the most complex rules for our industry, but you're supposed to lose at least 3.6% of your adult population of 16 months and older a year. And if you don't meet that minimum currently, prior to this summer, there was a 3-to-1 live testing upgrade that you could do to kind of make up for that number. That number is going to go to 5-to-1, 5% minimum mortality, and that minimum is going to go to the upgrade will be 5-to-1. So we're getting exponentially more annual surveillance. A lot of that was our own suggestion. I mean, we kept hearing that they had this kind of Wizard of Oz behind the curtain coming up with these predictive models back in 2016 on what a farm should lose annually. And they started off the discussion early this summer by saying, we had the failed predictive model. We have not received the surveillance that we really wanted. And so we went to work to try to figure out how to get them that surveillance. And, we even reduced the amount of time it took to tune a sample from 14 days down to 7 days. We even, we proposed, the increase of annual kind of minimum mortality. We proposed going down from 16 months to 12 months. We proposed from 80% to 100%. All that being said, we're the only entity that has any kind of mandated testing, and we're fine with increasing that annual surveillance. We just, what we're not fine with is then, in addition to that, having to live test any animal that is going to be released, even on our own properties. If we have a group of does that we want to turn out this spring that are bred, and we're trying to enhance our genetics on our own personal properties, we can't open a gate and let them run 2 feet away onto our attached ranch. We have to live test those animals, which means we have to tranquilize the animals, put them down and have a rectal or tonsil biopsy taken. Anytime you put an animal down, you're risking killing that animal. We love our animal. That kind of scenario is so ridiculous in our mind. I mean, currently, anyway, we're against that scenario, and so we're opposed kind of increasing the annual surveillance in lieu of doing that. And what we got back with this proposal to answer the question was, it took annual surveillance offset.
Boy, John, I just lost you there for a second. Okay, hey, Charlie, maybe you can answer this one. I got a fellow by the name of Chuck said he read an article about the CWD was caused by low levels of copper. Can you touch on that briefly? I mean, is it nutritional?
Well, and thanks for that question, whoever asked that, because there is some research going on right now, and has been research for some time on the different copper levels within the white-tailed deer. It's been proven that a white-tailed deer has a very low amount of copper content and some of the positive deer. And so by putting that copper in the feed, they're getting some really good results with that. And, unfortunately, a lot of the health officials and everything are kind of dismissing that research. But there's some feed companies right now across the country, in fact, particularly one in Texas, Lycian Echo Feed, they're adding that copper content, Keith, to their deer pellets, things like that, raising that copper level, and it's showing some great promise. So great question. And also, Keith, I'd like to, something that we haven't even touched on yet, and the hysteria that's caused by all of this has absolutely devastated land values and things like that across the parts of Texas and quite frankly, everywhere. And the models right now, we're talking about the decimation of the herds. In these areas, the models that are showing that the deer will cease to exist in 50 to 100 years, these models are not taking into account anything about urban sprawl, predators, and things like that. And so it's strictly a computer model that's putting that out there. And if you remember, in Wisconsin, they spent $32 million trying to eradicate the deer in a certain area down around Mount Horeb. And what they did was increase within 3 or 4 years, increase the deer herd because management works.
Okay, so let's talk about how things have changed, okay, and how things are going to change. Kevin, you and I've talked about this a lot. It's like, 20 years ago in Texas, I don't know what the average size piece of land that people hunted on, but it was a whole lot bigger than what it is today. And the reason why, I don't care if it's Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, doesn't matter. There's something called land fragmentation. Land fragmentation is when you take a big piece of land or a small piece of land, whatever, and through time, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. What I mean by that, it gets fragmented. You start out, let's say you have 1,000 acres that one family owns, and that man dies, and he leaves it to his 2 kids, and you have 2 500-acre places. And each one of those guys has got 2 kids, and then it divides up, and every time it divides up, you've got all these different landowners making all these different land decisions. Somebody wants hunting, somebody doesn't want hunting, somebody wants trophy hunting, everybody wants something different. But the deer doesn't know that it has another owner, or 10, or 20. The deer lives on all those pieces of property and travels back and forth and back and forth. Okay, like Tim said, 186 miles in 22 days in Missouri. So they travel on. Kevin, how does the future look? Because these pieces of property, deer farming has got its place, because these small pieces of property, what are they going to do if they want deer and there's no deer? They're just not going to go to the deer store. What do?
Well, you're going to see the prevalence of high fence increase as the property size decreases. So you're going to see people wanting to manage herds within their own smaller property and not be at the mercy of the management practices of their next door neighbor or their next door neighbor. So high fence is going to increase in prevalence. It's already super popular in Texas, but it's going to become even more popular. And you're going to see these 2 to 500 acre properties needing deer to release on their property to increase their genetics, to improve their management practices, and improve hunter opportunity in the small properties.
And in so doing, they're now going to be able to get deer that are more CWD resistant because of the technology that we have available to us. So deer farmers we're going to be able to breed CWD, the prevalency so far down that these people that are wanting to buy deer from deer farmers, they're the healthiest deer out there.
Correct. And like you said earlier in the broadcast, this entire discussion is more about hunting and hunting heritage than anything else. And we desperately need to protect our hunting opportunity and our hunting heritage, and deer breeders offer that opportunity and that level of protection.
Well, we're gonna wrap this up, guys, and I appreciate all y'all for taking the time. I see we lost Charlie; he was on the mountain and out of Raton, but appreciate y'all, and I want to appreciate everybody who stuck with us. This has been a long deal, but hopefully it's informed you. Hopefully it's given you an opportunity to learn something you didn't know. We hope that you've gone over here and read the rules and objected to them and supported the Texas deer breeders against Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. And I want to end up by saying that we all want to work together. We want to look for things that unite us and not divide us. And I think that CWD is one of those things that has been used to divide us. And I want to say, hey, let's work with calm heads and listen to the science. Let's all work together and let's take the high road. So if y'all have any questions or comments, you can go ahead and post them below, or you can contact any of these guys on their websites, and it's in this post. And I appreciate y'all. Thanks a bunch, and I appreciate everybody out there watching.
Thank you, Keith.
Y'all take care.
Thank you, Keith.
Appreciate it.